In 1967, Christopher Papa released a scientific paper which could turn the cosmetic skincare industry on its head. I know you think I'm exaggerating just for clickbait, but the link's in the description below to the study so you can check it out for yourself. I'm going to go through it here start to finish in detail because it shows you how he managed to figure out how to reverse aging in the skin, all the signs of aging, both visually and on a microscopic level, using just a single ingredient that potentially is more powerful than anything we're using today. I'm going to go through exactly how it was done, which ingredients they tested, the concentrations of them, exactly how they applied them, and how you can do the same thing today to possibly replace your entire skincare range with just one product or one single ingredient. Let's get straight to it. So this, as you can see, is the study itself, published in 1967 in the Journal of Society of Cosmetic Chemists. It was presented in 1966. And this asterisk represents something I think is quite interesting. This was actually supported by the US government in some ways. It says here, supported in part by US Public Health Service. I don't think that would happen today. But here's what they essentially are summarizing. So at that point, they knew already testosterone has a rejuvenating or ameliorative effect. And it certainly has improvement in the microscopic architecture of the skin. So even, almost 60 years ago at the time of recording this, they knew that topically applied hormones, i.e. stuff that you rub in the skin, hormones you rub in the skin, can have a huge cellular scale anti-aging effect. We seem to have forgotten that today. I wonder why. Now, this study was done on the basis that when we get older, we lose endocrine function. So endocrine function is basically how different parts of the body communicate with other parts of the body by signaling to each other. Technically, every organ really is an endocrine organ because they all have communication abilities. And it also says representative steroids from the male, female, and adrenocortical hormones were included in the study. So I don't know if this would be something that flies today, but that's what they looked at back then. And here's what's really crucial. 200 residents or 200 subjects were in the study. And this was in Riverview Home, which is basically kind of like a nursing home. Now, back then, the ethics of scientific studies are not what they are today. We have rigorous consent processes where you can sue a lot easier, essentially. Back then, they could just turn up to a nursing home, get people to enter a study, even if they didn't fully understand it. And the reason studies back then, which did these kind of things, are really reliable, is because they never really went anywhere, these residents. And so they could control, if you're doing a study on diet, they could control everything they ate. So they have really good experimental information. And in this case, they can control exactly what topical products are being applied to them, which is how they figured out what happens here. So they also followed up for 5 years. Just think about this for a second, okay? That even the range of ages, 57 to 88, the top end. When you look at studies today, so for example, any product released by La Roche-Posay, L'Oreal, I did a video recently on OneSkin, you look at, first of all, how many people are included. Usually it's maximum a couple dozen. They are followed for probably a few weeks, like 6 weeks or 12 weeks, which is nothing. And they are usually in sort of 20s, 30s, 40s, something like that. And when you're younger, you've got enough cell function still to get a good response to things. So it's easier in some ways to get a good result. This is why when you're using, say, injectable treatments to rejuvenate skin, for example, to create different types of collagen, it's easier on a younger patient. And an older patient is going to take many more sessions to get a similarly good result, unfortunately. And so here, 200 people, half a decade follow-up, and people up to 88 years old. The hardest type of patient because they've gone so far down that aging road. And as you'll see, they are covered in wrinkles. It's not a few lines around the eyes, which partly disappeared. It's huge wrinkles everywhere, which fully disappeared, which I'll show you. And again, they had equal numbers of men and women. Normally nowadays, you only find women in the study. So here, what they were able to say is sex of the aged patient or the aged subject is irrelevant with regard to the effect of the hormones on the skin. So they're showing that it doesn't matter whether you're a man or woman. This is actually pretty universal. And what else makes this a good study? Well, 1,500 individual specimens. And this was done, as you can see here, biopsy samples. So a lot of the studies that you look at nowadays, especially when it comes to skincare and skin products, even skin injectables in the cosmetic medical industry. What happens is you have something called some kind of visual scale. Sometimes it's called a GAIS, Global Aesthetic Improvement Score. It's basically just someone looking at the face and saying, does it look better? The problem with data like that is it's very, very subjective. And if the person observing to create that score, create that subjective opinion of whether it's approved or not, is funded by the company providing the materials for the study, obviously they're going to be a little bit biased as well. And so subjective assessments will always have that question mark over them. When you look at a biopsy study, which if you don't know what that is, it's basically a sample. You take a sample of the tissue, you can put it under the microscope and see what's actually happening. And you can do quantitative measures, objective measures, not subjective, where you can look at, for example, measurements of how thick the skin is. So there's no subjective interpretation. It's a pure number, cell numbers, cell densities, distributions of cells in different parts of the tissue. And most people don't do that. In fact, look at any kind of skincare that you want where there's a claim which says 90% swan improvement after 6 weeks or something like that. And when you look at the study, all of these parameters which we've got in here aren't going to be in those ones most likely. And they're certainly not going to be doing biopsy samples, let alone, as you can see here, 1,500 samples. I mean, that's incredible. So the weight of the credibility, the weight of the conclusion, the weight of what we can see in terms of the results is pretty good. You know, compare that to a modern day skincare marketing study where they've got a couple dozen people, a couple of weeks, and that's it. And it's all subjective. Big, big difference. And they looked at the face, the extensor forearm, the back of the hand, essentially sites which are exposed to the sun, and they show the changes of senescence. So senescence is a bit of a technical word for those that don't know. It's a product of aging. You know, when we start to age and cells basically are done for, they become senescent cells. I won't get too technical, but you can Google that if you're interested. Now, what they're saying is really crucial. When you are studying areas which are exposed to the sun, you're going to get more damage from the sun, from UV radiation, things like free radicals. And so some skincare companies will test products on areas like, say, on the body, which is fine. You're going to have problems on the body. But because they're not being hit by the sun all the time, in some ways it's easier to get a result because there's nothing sending you backwards in terms of UV fighting you while the skincare is helping you. You're not in this battle. And yet they did it on all the sun-exposed sites and non-sun exposed sites. They looked at the axilla, which in layman's terms is the armpit, and that's protected from solar radiation, as you can see, but it still deteriorates. Now, that's a really good area to study skincare and the aging and how you can actually reverse aging, not how you can improve the texture or the color, because that's not really aging per se. To test the aging in the armpit is really useful for the following reasons. Number one, you've got hair there. Number two, you've got these eccrine glands. These are sweat glands. Technically, we've got apocrine as well, but they're looking at the eccrine here. Now, these are things which can be objective in terms of measurement. So you can see how many hairs, you can measure the density of the hair, you can measure the length of the hair, you can even measure the numbers between, say, gray and colored hair, which again is a sign of how much you've reversed the senescence process, how much you've reversed aging. And then when you look at the sweat glands, the key thing there is you can actually measure the function returning. I know people obviously don't want to sweat, but it's not about trying to make you sweat more. It's about trying to measure signs of aging, which are critical in a quantitative, a numbers-based way, which doesn't rely on opinion. So I'm going to show you how they do that here, but they essentially look at the amount of skin where they have functioning glands. And you can measure that as, you know, a perimeter, you can measure it as surface area, and you get a plus or minus between the before and the after. So here's what they used. Testosterone propionate 1%. I know when you think testosterone, you think, well, that's TRT, testosterone replacement therapy, or HRT, hormone replacement therapy. What the hell are they doing? Rubbing this into the skin? Well, it's incredibly anti-aging. No wonder people use it in TRT and hormone replacements. Now, propionates, okay, that's a key. So this is a type of testosterone ester. So you can't just take standard testosterone, this pure testosterone, because it will it can't last, it can't be stable, and it has to have a delivery vehicle to be sent into the skin, basically. So even if you're injecting for TRT, you're injecting something along the lines of, say, testosterone cypionate. Even if you're taking magnesium as a supplement, it has to be magnesium malate, citrate, glycinate, something along those lines. So it has to be a form of what is being given, whether it's a micronutrient or a mineral like magnesium, or a hormone like testosterone as well. Now, you will not really find testosterone propionate nowadays, and I will show you why at the end of the study, but that's the version that was used in this, and that's critical if you want to understand, number one, why we are using that in the skin, and number two, why there's no whole body effect, because people actually do TRT nowadays by taking testosterone gel or cream, and they actually just rub it onto themselves. In fact, I believe Lance Armstrong used testosterone cream to have a whole body effect, and that was one of the ways he was doping. So I know you're probably thinking, why does this not have a whole body effect? But we will get into that very, very soon. But that's what they used. And I'm just going to highlight the other things they use. So progesterone, 1%, that's another hormone. Pregnenolone, and this is the acetate form, 0.5%. Estradiol, basically estrogen, if you like. Triamcinolone acetonide, fluocinolone acetonide. They tested all these ingredients, different types of hormones and corticosteroids, to see which one would come out on top. And it was pretty clear which one came out on top. Now, they tested this, crucially, unilaterally. What does that mean? It means they only treated one half of the patient, which I don't think people would sign up for nowadays when you see the massive effect it had. But it's a really good way to do a study. And it's very hard to find skincare companies that offer that now for many reasons. It's not just the fault of the skincare company. So they gave the active ingredient on one half, and then just some kind of placebo, if you like, the carrier, on the other side without the active ingredient. It was done daily, it was topical, it was rubbed in, and they used roughly 0.5 grams for one side. And the contralateral side, as I said, had the corresponding vehicle. Vehicle basically just means a thing that's carrying this active ingredient, but without the active ingredient. So they're just rubbing that in. So it's not going to do anything, obviously. So it's a nice placebo. Now, let's scroll down a little bit. So before I show you the pictures, 6 months, this is crucial, 6 months of treatment are necessary before the hormonal effects become apparent. So please understand, this is not something you rub in and overnight, suddenly your skin transformed. It doesn't work like that. What's going to happen is you have to build this up, and then slowly the cell function starts to return, and you end up probably in this sort of hockey stick effect where it's a slow growth, and then you cross this critical point, and then things start to really, really increase from there. So 6 months for apparent, for the treatment to become apparent, or the effects to become apparent. Bear in mind though, these are people, going up to 88 years old. I suspect when people are doing it much earlier in their lives or much younger, it's not going to be 6 months. But that's what was tested to make it more difficult as a test, to test such older patients. Now, I know this isn't exactly a digital camera picture, but it was the 1960s. Please bear that in mind. However, even with that, you can see remarkable effects. Let me move this to the middle of the screen. So this is one half. This is the side that just had the placebo or the carrier with no active ingredient. You can see, these aren't 3 little lines on the side of the eyes that most skincare companies are trying to show before and after of, and you can barely see an effect nowadays. This is the entire side of the face. And it's got its texture. It's not even a wrinkle. It's the whole thing that has this massive amount of texture. And look at the other side. I mean, look how smooth that is. I'm sure it's not perfect, and the picture is not great. But I think one of the reasons it's a bit overexposed in the picture is because there's no texture for the light to be trapped within the wrinkles and produce shadows. And remember, this person specifically is 75 years old. 75. That's just extraordinary. Someone whose cells have aged that much is able to be brought back to the point where there's no wrinkles. And look at another effect. Look at the way this section here, it's caught that shadow because the fat underneath the skin is probably what we call atrophied. It's just aged and shrunk a little bit over time. And you can see that all over the face, which is why the skin has kind of just sunk in a little bit. But when you look on this side, it's got this youthful plumpness all over the place that we have when we're children, which is how much it's reversed the aging. That to me is extraordinary. And in this one, they use progesterone. There is considerable effacement of the wrinkles on the progesterone treated side and some stimulation of downy hair growth as well. Now, progesterone was not even the strongest ingredient that they found. And this before and after, as you can see, it should say here, was 3 years, okay? Now, 3 years is a long time. Remember that, okay? So it takes 6 months at this age to see a noticeable improvement and 3 years to go from complete and utter texture everywhere with a lot of caving in of the skin to looking, like that skin there is probably look like someone's in their 20s or 30s perhaps. Let's keep going. Now, this is another thing. So comparison of hair growth in testosterone treated, so this side, versus control. So what you can see is this side here, the hair is much less. The hair is shorter. The hair is less dense, okay? And the surface area that it covers is a little bit less as well. Look at this side. The hair is more dense. It's longer. You can't tell the color, unfortunately, because I didn't have color pictures back then. But you can see the density of it, and the surface area is actually growing out to the side, whereas here it's just in this sort of middle section here. Now, here they used testosterone. I'll read it for you. The untreated site typifies a great regression of axillary hair in old age. So what they're saying is, in old age, you notice the hair reducing, whereas a testosterone effect, and this is critical, please pay attention, the effect is strictly limited to the hormone treated side. What does that mean? I know you guys are thinking, well, how can this not have a systemic whole body effect? Because we use testosterone gel for a whole body effect. I'll explain that soon. But if this had a whole body effect, you would see changes on both sides. But the untreated side was exactly the same as when they started, showing it was just a local effect, which is really, really interesting. So let's have a look what else they wrote here. The wrinkled appearance of the face and dorsal hand was considerably smooth, and the skin felt firmer and thicker. That's what we saw in the previous picture. The laxity in the back of the hand, which formerly tented for a finite time, stretched now, sprang back quickly. So what they're saying is, when you pull the skin like this, it should spring back very, very quickly. And they managed that. What that tells you, it's not just collagen, that I know a lot of you think is what anti-aging is based on. It's more than that. It's elastin as well. So they are actually able to create elastin. Collagen isn't necessarily the one responsible for elasticity. That's elastin. That's why it's called elastin. So they're clearly making elastin. They're making different proteins, which is incredible. It's not just a single thing. You have all these products that induce collagen. This is clearly inducing pretty much everything at the same time, hence why we're getting elastin too. So all of you guys are obsessed with finasteride and minoxidil, trying to regrow your hair. I mean, this potentially could be even stronger than those things. So let's carry on and have a look at some other things as well. To a lesser extent on the forearms and face. So you can see this in other parts of the body. A similar augmentation was produced on the abdomen, back, and thigh. That's really important because, I've always said or always thought companies which produce different skincare products, so one for the face, one for the eyes, one for the neck, one for the body, whatever, like it just doesn't make sense to me. Skin is still skin. Like, why would they need something else? You may have more wrinkles in one area, but it doesn't change the nutritional requirements of the cell. So to create separate products, to me, that's just marketing nonsense. You have different thicknesses of skin on different parts of the body and the face, which may alter the strength of the product that you may start with. And then when that's adapted to it, then you can go with the same strength or the strongest strength that you have everywhere. That's probably about it. That's all you need, in my opinion. But there's no such thing as an eye cream it's a reason. Why is there no forehead cream or nose cream or jawline cream? It makes no sense. And in this test, we kind of see that because they got the same effect wherever they used it. Abdomen, back, thigh, face, all these places. But here's another crucial thing. This is important because it shows how aging was reversed or showing that cell function returns, because a problem with aging is losing cell function. That as we age, That's exactly what happens. Information is lost. Instructions are lost for the cell. Eccrine function of the axilla was also enhanced. What does that mean? Eccrine, those sweat glands I spoke about, if you were to use this test, which is called a Waders iodine starch castor oil procedure, as I've labeled it here, essentially what you're doing is you're rubbing the armpit with a liquid, and it goes purple when you can see active sweat. So you can see the surface area where there's active sweat glands. Now that's going to shrink and shrink and shrink as we get older because the cell function reduces. So the active glands reduce. Glands all over our body are going to reduce as we age in terms of function. So if you wipe that area with this product, you can then see in a quantitative, non-subjective way the size of the area, the surface area, where you've got active function. Now, if you have a small area like that, and then over time you do something and it goes like this, you've returned cell function. You've returned the very thing that is lost with aging. Ergo, in that context, you have made the cell age backwards. You've given it more years, essentially. And I can show you how they did that here because it worked. This is extraordinary, right? I know, again, the picture isn't great, but essentially what they're doing is showing the effect of the topical testosterone. So in this side here, on the left half, what I want you to do specifically is to look at this section here. So the area that is on the edge of the face in the picture. Then look at the same on the other side here. Can you see the hair difference? Look at this. I mean, it's not this, you can see what's gray and what's black actually. It's actually black hairs, not even gray. That's just incredible. So it's coming, not only is new hair coming through, but it's coming through in the color that they used to have when they were much younger as well, which is just extraordinary. So let's just read this here. Left side of the face, an 84-year-old white woman. So 84, and they're saying why? Because, you've got less protection, you've got less natural melanin in the skin as a Caucasian person versus say, an Afro-Caribbean person, as an example. This is after 1.5 years. So they're getting beard growth, actual beard growth. No microneedling, no injectable drugs, no, injectable TRT, nothing like that. Just rubbing something in and they're getting beard growth. Now, 1.5 years may sound like a long time, but you've got to remember that is in someone who is 84 years old and probably did no anti-aging treatment in her entire life because this kind of stuff just wasn't around back then. So you imagine if you're younger and you do look after yourself, I suspect that's going to be much, much less. And a cream vehicle was similarly applied to the right side. So here is where the placebo was. I know that's left, but it's the picture will be flipped. Don't worry, it's not some typo or whatever. The moustache was present beforehand, as were a few wisps of hair on the chin. And you can see a few wisps of hair there, and you can see the massive difference here. And again, here's another safety element for those of you that think this might be something that has an effect on the whole body. They rubbed it on one side, and they only got improvement on one side. So if it was having a whole body effect, it would have done both sides, but clearly it didn't. Let's carry on. So earlier recruitment and an increased density of functioning glands. So this is what happened to the armpit when they treated it with the hormones. Progesterone, this is another ingredient they tried. They saw qualitatively similar effects to that of testosterone, but lower order of magnitude. So progesterone also created a sort of anti-aging effect or an aging reversal effect, but to a much lesser extent. And so testosterone actually came out on top in terms of all the ingredients that they tested here. Pregnenolone was even weaker in effect. Another one. Estrogens produced no observable improvement in the aged skin, and if anything, tended to, I'll highlight this, suppress both hair growth and eccrine sweating in the axilla. So something like testosterone increased the function, therefore really reversed the aging, whereas the estrogens did the exact opposite. If anything, they, as you can see here, they suppressed further hair growth and eccrine sweating, or armpit functioning glands, sweat glands, if you like. That's interesting in terms of which one is more anti-aging than the other. Well, one's clearly anti-aging, one's pro-aging, in fact. And then also to the others, corticosteroid hormones accentuated the defects of senescence. So they again made things slightly worse. In fact, when they used those, the skin became thinner, atrophic, and even more lax. So even more aged if you like. Now, testosterone, progesterone, and pregnenolone, in that order, a general rejuvenating effect on senescent skin, aged skin. So number one is testosterone. And as I said, estrogen mildly accentuated some of the aging characteristics, while corticosteroids profoundly increased the degradative alterations. So this is that armpit test that I showed you. So you can see this is a 75-year-old white man. So again, someone who's not exactly a spring chicken. So side A, which is the left of the screen here, there's diminished activity in the aging axilla. So that's what they were doing in terms of surface area, total surface area of functioning glands. And on the other side, you can see, I mean, it's almost off the picture, the amount of cell function that has returned to the area is just huge. And that was treated with testosterone. Now, there is going to be higher sweating in that area. But again, it's not done to make your life more smelly. It's just to show what it can do in terms of returning cell function, as I said. But just look at the size difference of both of those. I mean, that is just extraordinary. Let's keep going. So that's another picture there. I haven't got time to go through every single thing, but you can see treated, untreated sides in terms of skin quality there. So here is one of the biopsy samples. So this is an 80-year-old white woman, and it shows atrophic epidermis in the aged skin and degraded dermis as well. And both skins are magnified to the same amount. So you can see on top, this top bit here, which looks like almost a honeycomb structure, that's an area of the skin called the stratum corneum. That's in the epidermis. And you can see it's really quite flayed. It's not very compact. It's not going to provide a very good skin barrier function in that way. And you can see it's, the entire rest of it is really not that thick because you've got this thing sit here, the second slide, to compare that to. Now in here, you can see the stratum corneum is much more compact, a bit like a fist rather than an open hand. That's going to provide much better skin barrier function. You can see the other cells here, that entire area is much, much thicker. And if you look at this area at the bottom of the slide, you can see the really stark amount of contrast between different parts. Whereas here, everything is much, much more even and uniform, which is what you're going to find in much younger people. So the skin just looks like it's from a completely different person. And equal magnification is important to show that it's not that it's just been zoomed in. So this is another thing that you rarely find in skincare marketing nowadays, actual biopsy samples, not just that, but in the long term and from old people as well. So that speaks for itself. I'm really, really impressed by this. I hope you are too. And you can see this isn't just a fad. This isn't, a 12-week 5% reduction in wrinkle depth or some specific statistic. And there's no subjectivity. This is incredible. Let's keep going. So there's even more. Again, that speaks for itself. You can see, these little dark bits here, these are cells in the dermis. These represent things like fibroblasts, which make collagen, which make elastin, which make hyaluronic acid, really important things for skin quality and skin aging, shall we say. You can see there's first of all, just barely any. And now they're dotted all over the place and in the top part and the bottom part of the skin as well. And again, that will be equal magnification. And that is an 80-year-old white woman. 80 years old, and that's what they achieved. That's extraordinary. And look at this, this is you can see these fibroblasts again here, not that big. They're a little bit flattened, that the form is not that great, doesn't look very healthy, and they're mostly concentrated actually towards the upper portion of the dermis. Here, look at the size of them. They're big and strong and healthy, and they're littered about the entire thickness of the dermis. And not to mention the upper portion here. That's just extraordinary. In that first picture, we saw bipolar spindle-shaped fibroblasts, packed in parallel bundles at the upper portions of the dermis. But then after treatment, we got blast-like stellate form, which is the proper form, and they found more uniformly distributed throughout the dermis. And in C, they used corticosteroids, and they made a marked diminution, a reduction, shall we say, on the cell population, where you can see here, there's just almost no fibroblast. It's gotten worse. So there's good controls here. They're all from the same specimen. So here's what they found, on the microscopic scale. So structural improvements, what that means is fibers outside the cell, like collagen and elastin, as well as the cells themselves. So the things that produce stuff and all the stuff that is produced, both of those things increased massively. And that was far more impressive than those appreciated with the unaided eye. So you can get a good result from the visual side, but if you zoom in, you can see that things are basically decades younger at the same time. And apparent in the majority of subjects, about 75%. Now remember, some of you may think 75%, oh, that's not quite 100%. These guys, the top end was pushing 90 years old. And to still get a 75% improvement, if you did this today on people much younger, I suspect that's going to be in the 90s in terms of percentage, maybe even 100% or close to 100%. So they saw thickening of the treated epidermis, increase in cell size, the individual cell, and the number of cell layers as well. So the skin is creating its own new barrier function, an improved barrier function through getting thickness. This, one of the benefits of this is that you get more insulation from the outside world. It's like having a thicker wall in your house. When people are partying outside, it's going to wake you up less because the sound has to travel through a thicker wall. In this context, when the skin is thicker, it's less likely to be irritated. So people with sensitive skin, potentially this thickening of the tissues gives more insulation, so the nerve endings are stimulated less. So even sensitive skin, I suspect, could have a massive impact on this, could have a massive benefit from this, I should say. So they saw a regularity in cell size, shape, nuclear content, cytoplasmic content, and the whole thing was plumper, and the nuclei were more visibly seen as well. This is extraordinary. Stratification of cells throughout the epidermis was restored to the normal pattern. So the epidermis, for those who don't know, is made up of many layers. And there's different cell types in each layer. And the cell goes from the bottom to the top through a journey, and it changes what type it is as it gets closer to the surface. As we age, that clarification, that demarcation between the layers and the quality of those layers is less and less. So what they're saying is they actually found those layers went back to normal instead of maybe being squashed up and not that distinct from each other. And the basement membrane thickened perceptibly. The basement membrane is what kind of stitches the different layers together. It's very, very strong. Well, it has to be strong. And you lose the integrity of that as we get older. But here, even the basement membrane thickened massively. So it's not just the stratum corneum on top, which is getting the benefit. It's things underneath that as well. Even the dermis, which is underneath, is getting a benefit too. And this is really crucial. The dermis showed increased AMP, adenosine monophosphate. This is a metabolic improvement. AMP is a product, okay, adenosine monophosphate. When we phosphorylate that, it goes to ADP, and then we phosphorylate again, it goes to ATP, which is really important molecular metabolism because think of it as a currency of energy, okay? It's a little more complicated, but I don't want to get too complicated in this video. And AMP is showing us that the cells are actually functioning more because with increased metabolism comes increased need for energy currencies to spend so you can do more jobs, you can build more things, you can break more things down. So they're actually showing metabolic and physiological increase. It's not just that things look smoother, because sometimes you get skincare where it just, you shove in like some hyaluronic acid, which might attract water to make it look plumper. It doesn't mean you've actually increased the physiology. Here, they are showing the actual physiological increase, which means it's going to be much more long-term in terms of benefits as well. That's what makes it anti-aging, because it's changing from the inside out rather than from the surface on its own, and that's it. So they saw alteration in morphology of the fibroblasts. It's altered, as we said, a plump stellate form, and they were distributed more evenly throughout the dermis. The subepidermal zone now contained numerous fine elastic fibers perpendicular to the dermoepidermal junction. So what they're saying is fibers like collagen and elastin are more present now, which is why when they said earlier that they pulled the skin, it sprang back more sharply, they were able to produce that result because they're producing more fibers like collagen and elastin. And you have to also, when you're looking at things like this, a lot of people don't talk about the orientation. There is an element of geometry when it comes to these elastic fibers, because elasticity, tension and release is a vector quantity. It happens in a particular direction. And so when fibers are misorientated, you get less function out of them. Whereas when they're orientated in a specific way, for example, in scar tissue, they're all orientated right on top of each other like that in the same orientation, which is why you get things like keloid tissue. And that makes that scar tissue stronger to resist trauma in the same way, in the same direction. But in health, this is in layman's terms, the same collagen is laid out perpendicular like this, like the fibers of a trampoline, which are run at 90 degrees, so you can bounce and they can take that tension. So what they're saying is this actually improved not just the amount and the quality of the fibers, but it returned their orientation to what should be ideal as well. So your skin is going to get softer and plumper and smoother, hence why that before and after picture showed that plumpness in the face as well. And this is crucial. Estrogen-treated tissues couldn't be distinguished from the controls. No effects, basically. So, observed results are entirely local. Let's explain this for a second, because I know some of you, as I said, are going to be worried that this is going to give you basically hormone replacement therapy. But here's why that's not the case. When you have the application of a hormone, let's say you're injecting something like testosterone cypionate, as I mentioned earlier. The form that the testosterone is in this case, cypionate, has to be calculated in such a way so you know how long it lasts and its absorbability. Testosterone propionate, which was used here, was used at one point to try and replace testosterone, but it was stopped because it didn't last very long, propionate versus cypionate. And also it was very few effects, and that hence why they're using it in a local way. So there's no systemic effect here because propionate is only a short-acting form, hence why it's daily application. So when they were trying to use testosterone propionate for systemic conditions, constant use was a bit more inconvenient, whereas something like testosterone cypionate and anthate, they last much longer. So we tend to use those so that people might be able to use the application, the injection, once a week. And so with this, it's too short-acting. As well as that, propionate clearly cannot escape the skin, make its way into the bloodstream, and then have an effect on the whole body. And so that's why observed results are entirely local, to quote the paper. So this is why it's safe, because it cannot provide a systemic effect. And if you want to see the proof, again, the paper is in the description. 200 people, 1,500 biopsies. None of them had a systemic effect. All of them showed a difference between left and right, between the treated side and the non-treated side. And that shows you the safety in knowing this does not have a systemic effect per se. So again, they're saying effects on distant or neighboring untreated skin do not occur because it's local, because of the form the testosterone is used in. This is why when people ask about supplements, things like, should I take magnesium? Should I take zinc? Is this magnesium good? Well, different forms of magnesium are good for different things. Different forms of testosterone are used in different contexts. It's not the nutrient or the hormone, it's which form it is packaged up in that gives you a specific usage. Systemic administration of the hormones, so giving it to the whole body, in therapeutic amounts over an extended time are also ineffective. So even, and this is a reference here, you can look up the reference list in the study if you want, even when it was given systemically, didn't have a noticeable effect or a significant effect, at least to this scale, on the skin. And so there must be some difference in metabolism of these hormones in the body and in the skin. Bear that in mind. I find that really interesting. Estrogen, though, showed significant absorption. As such, with general effects, now listen carefully here, such as gynecomastia in men and resumption of uterine bleeding in postmenopausal women. Let me break that down. The testosterone couldn't escape the skin. The estrogen did, or could and did, escape the skin, and it had a whole body effect such that men developed breasts, man boobs, I think, if in layman's terms, if you like. It happens when vegans eat a lot of soy. Female vegans who eat a lot of soy, they have breast changes. Male vegans who eat a lot of soy, they grow man boobs, they grow breasts. This is well known. You can Google this if you like, have a look yourself. And they showed that, when they rubbed it on women, uterine bleeding resumed even after menopause. So the estrogen is clearly having systemic effects. The testosterone in this form cannot have a systemic effect, clearly. So cutaneous pathways of metabolism for steroids exist. What does that mean? So cutaneous just means for the skin. So pathways in the skin exist that mean these hormones can be used, can have an effect, and can also affect how they travel or don't travel. Either they stay in the skin or they go around the body. And it's different for testosterone and estrogen. And remember, this was done on men and women. So for both genders, testosterone couldn't escape the skin and it only had that local effect. So with regard to the practical implications, modest changes on skin, which was already markedly damaged. So already damaged. Imagine what it could do when it was used as prophylaxis, i.e. as prevention rather than a cure, will yield even more satisfactory results, or might well yield even more satisfactory results. And I agree. I think that's exactly what we can take from this. If you start it earlier, and it's not going to have a systemic effect, remember, just a local effect, I think this could be absolutely extraordinary. And that is why I'm going to be doing this on myself, okay? And I've also got a cohort of patients who are also doing it right now. Now, for those of you who are interested in this, who want to try this yourself, I know you're expecting me to say some money-making scheme where I can take money from you right now. No, just go to any medically licensed person and ask for this. Have a conversation about this. Say you want to try this. Say, you show them this paper if you like. Show that there is no systemic effects. It has been done on many, many people. It's very safe. It can't go beyond the skin. And what they can do is something called compounding, where they basically get the product made specifically for you. Now, the reason they can do it and the reason I can do it for my patients is because we are medically licensed. Only medically licensed people, such as doctors, for instance, they can actually get a specific pharmaceutical product made for that person in a formulation that is unique for that person, as opposed to just off-the-shelf drugs. Now, because I'm medically qualified, I can do this for my patients as well. Otherwise, I won't be able to prescribe anything. I admit it's going to be difficult to find doctors where you can take this paper to and say, can I do this? If you're struggling, contact me. You have my website in the link in the description below. You can become a patient of mine wherever you are in the world, and we can do it for you as well. I know some of you think, well, this whole thing was just an advert. No, because I wanted to educate you guys on this, and you can go to other people, not me. And at the end of the day, yes, this is going to make me money because it's my job. This is what keeps my lights on. This is what allows me to feed my family. So, of course, treating patients is a way for me to make money because it's my job. Like I said, if you are interested, contact me below. You can choose either the general consultation for a one-off or a lifelong supervision option where we can maintain contact for your skincare as you get older as well. Either one. And hopefully this has been very, very educational for you, and I hope it helps.